High in the Andes above the city of Cusco, there is a wall you can press your hand against. The stones are massive, some weighing over 100 tons, fitted together so tightly that 500 years later you cannot slide a sheet of paper between them. No mortar, no metal tools, no written record of how it was done. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 1530s, they dismissed it as crude pagan stonework and built their cathedrals on top of it. The earthquakes that followed leveled the cathedrals. The Inca walls beneath them did not move. This is Sacsayhuaman, and when modern engineers finally measured what they were looking at, they didn't just update the textbooks, they threw them out entirely. To understand why Sacsayhuaman matters, you first need to stand inside it, at least in your imagination. Picture a ridge rising 200 meters above the city of Cusco in the Peruvian Andes, more than 3,700 meters above sea level, where the air is thin and the light is sharp. Now picture 3 massive, zigzagging terraced walls running for nearly 400 meters along the ridge, each wall stepped back from the one below, built from limestone and andesite blocks of staggering size. Some are the height of a person. Some are taller than a 2-story house. The largest weigh 100 tons. The blocks are not rectangular. They are polyhedral, irregular, each one cut with as many as 12 angled faces, and each face fitted precisely to the unique geometry of the stones around it. There are no straight courses. There is no repeating module. Every joint is bespoke. Every surface curves and angles into the surfaces it touches with a fit so tight that 500 years of Andean weather, earthquakes, and human visitation have not opened a single gap wide enough to slide a credit card through. Now consider the timeline. The walls were built in the 15th century under the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, sometime between roughly 1440 and 1500 AD. By this point, European stonemasons had been working with iron chisels, geometric square cuts, and lime mortar for over 1,000 years. The NTA had none of that. No iron tools, no written language, no wheel for transport, no draft animals capable of pulling 100-ton loads, no mortar of any kind. By every conventional marker of what we call construction capability, none of the things we associate with monumental masonry existed in the Inca toolkit. No hardened steel cutters, no surveying instruments more sophisticated than knotted cords, no industrial lifting equipment, no written engineering manuals, no metallurgy beyond bronze and copper, neither of which is hard enough to cut andesite. The people responsible for Sacsayhuaman weren't supposed to be capable of building Sacsayhuaman. For nearly 400 years after the Spanish conquest, the walls of Sacsayhuaman were almost entirely ignored as an engineering subject. The conquistadors who arrived in the 1530s described them in their chronicles, but their interest was extractive rather than analytical. Pedro Cieza de León called the stonework astonishing in passing, and moved on. Garcilaso de la Vega, the mestizo chronicler born in Cusco in 1539, wrote that the Inca masonry surpassed anything in Europe, but his accounts were treated by later European scholars as the exaggerations of a colonial subject romanticizing his ancestry. The walls were used as a quarry. Cathedral foundations and colonial mansions across Cusco were built from blocks pulled directly out of the Sacsayhuaman complex. Serious investigation began only in the 20th century, and the figure most associated with its modern study is the Peruvian archaeologist Luis Valcárcel, who led the first systematic excavations of the site beginning in 1934. Valcárcel was a former minister of education turned full-time investigator of pre-Columbian sites, and he approached Sacsayhuaman with a willingness to take seriously what the Spanish chroniclers had dismissed. His teams documented the precision placement of dozens of the largest blocks, mapped the 3 terraced walls in full, and uncovered foundations of structures that had stood on the summit before Spanish demolition crews tore them down for building material. What he found beneath the surface was extraordinary. Drainage channels cut through the walls with deliberate hydraulic engineering, block placements that required the largest stones to be set first and smaller stones fitted around them, the opposite of every European masonry tradition. Polyhedral joints that locked the wall together in 3 dimensions, not just 2. In 1934, he published his initial findings and made a claim that the academic establishment of his time was not prepared to accept. His most provocative conclusion was that Inca masonry represented a precision engineering tradition equal to or surpassing anything in the ancient Mediterranean world. That the technique was not crude monumentalism, but sophisticated structural design. That an entire body of construction knowledge had vanished after the conquest. Valcarcel died in 1987. The instruments capable of proving him right did not yet exist. The story was only just beginning. When something this old and this impressive turns up in the engineering record, imagination tends to arrive before science does. And imagination, it turns out, is remarkably creative when confronted with 100-ton stones fitted together like puzzle pieces. The theories began almost as soon as Sacsayhuaman entered the popular imagination. For some, the sheer scale and precision of the walls were proof enough that ordinary 15th century masons couldn't have been responsible. Something else must have been involved, and from that single assumption, an entire ecosystem of alternative explanations bloomed. There were those who linked the site to Atlantis, arguing that the Inca had inherited the walls from an antediluvian civilization and were simply maintaining ruins they did not build. Others connected the construction to ancient astronaut theories, with Erich von Däniken specifically citing Sacsayhuaman in Chariots of the Gods as evidence that extraterrestrial engineers had cut the stones with directed energy weapons before handing the site over to local custodians. Graham Hancock has folded the walls into his lost civilization framework, suggesting they belong to a forgotten technological tradition that predates the Inca by thousands of years and was destroyed in the same prehistoric catastrophe he believes wiped the earth clean. A particularly persistent theory holds that the Inca possessed a now lost botanical compound capable of softening stone like clay, allowing the masons to mold the polyhedral joints by hand before the rock re-hardened. The story is usually traced to a vague reference about a small bird that supposedly knew the plant, which is, to put it generously, not the kind of evidence that survives technical scrutiny. Another theory insists the blocks were poured as a kind of geopolymer concrete, cast in place rather than cut, despite the fact that petrographic analysis consistently shows undisturbed natural mineral structure throughout each stone. What all of these theories share beneath their surface differences is a single, unspoken assumption: that the Inca, the actual human beings who built an empire of 12 million people across 4,000 kilometers of mountainous terrain in under a century, were simply not capable of cutting and fitting stones themselves. That assumption is wrong, and when modern imaging finally measured the walls properly, it revealed something the conspiracy theories had never considered. Before the headline reveal, the wall's own physical evidence had to do its work, and once researchers learned how to measure them properly, the evidence was overwhelming. Start with the joints themselves. The polyhedral fits at Sacsayhuaman have been documented to tolerances that strain belief. Photogrammetric surveys conducted between 2018 and 2022 by teams from the Universidad Nacional de San Antonio Abad del Cusco mapped joint gaps across hundreds of blocks. The average measured gap on the largest stones in the main wall sits below 0.5 millimeters across irregular contact surfaces measuring multiple square meters. That is sub-millimeter precision, achieved between two free-form curving faces on stones weighing tens of tons each, fitted by hand in the 15th century. Then consider the geometry. Detailed structural surveys have confirmed that individual blocks are cut with as many as 12 distinct angled faces, each precisely matched to the adjacent stones. The joints are not flat. They curve in 3 dimensions, locking each block into the wall not just laterally, but vertically, in a configuration engineers now describe as a fully 3-dimensional interlocking system. This is structurally sophisticated in ways European masonry never attempted until the 20th century. The tool marks tell their own story. Microscopic examination of the block surfaces reveals fine pecking patterns consistent with repeated impact from harder stone hammers, almost certainly hematite or basalt percussors. The cuts are remarkably uniform across enormous surface areas, suggesting standardized procedures, calibrated tools, and trained crews working from established workshop practices. Jean-Pierre Proutzen, the Berkeley architectural historian who spent decades studying Inca stonework, demonstrated through experimental archaeology that pecking with handheld stone hammers can produce exactly these surfaces, given sufficient time and skill. The transport evidence matters too. Some of the largest blocks at Sacsayhuaman were quarried at sites located up to 35 kilometers away, including the Rumacolca quarry across difficult mountain terrain. Drag paths and abandoned blocks called piedras cansadas, or tired stones, have been documented along the routes, confirming the transport methodology, even if the full logistics remain debated. The picture that emerges is not of a lucky one-off accident or a vanished super technology. It is of a community of practiced specialists working systematically with deep accumulated knowledge. For most of the wall's modern history, Sacsayhuaman kept its tightest secrets. The joints were too tight to probe with conventional instruments, the geometry too irregular to map with traditional surveying, and the surfaces too curved for flat measurement to capture meaningfully. Then, in the 2020s, lidar and high-resolution photogrammetry changed that completely. Between 2023 and 2024, a collaboration of Peruvian and international teams, including researchers associated with the Ministry of Culture of Peru and engineering groups from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, conducted full lidar scans of the main terraced walls combined with sub-millimeter photogrammetric reconstruction of individual block faces. The resolution was fine enough to capture surface variation smaller than the diameter of a human hair across blocks the size of small buildings. The results rewrote the engineering literature. The scans confirmed that joint tolerances on the largest blocks consistently fall below 0.5 millimeter across irregular contact surfaces measuring several square meters. The fits are not approximations achieved by filling gaps with smaller stones. They are direct stone-to-stone contacts maintained across the entire interface. Some blocks show contact surfaces that follow compound curves, meaning the masons cut concave and convex matching profiles into both stones simultaneously, a technique modern stonemasons describe as effectively unreproducible without computer numerical control. The lidar data also revealed something earlier surveys had missed. The walls are not flat. They batter inward at carefully calculated angles, and the individual block faces tilt subtly to distribute seismic load across the entire structure as a single integrated unit. When earthquake waves move through the bedrock beneath Cusco, the walls deform elastically and reseat themselves. This is why every Spanish colonial structure built on top of Sacsayhuaman has been damaged or destroyed by earthquakes since 1650, while the NCA walls beneath them have not moved. Material analysis published in recent peer-reviewed work has also identified surface alteration on some blocks consistent with localized heating, possibly from controlled friction during final fitting, though the interpretation remains debated. This matters enormously. The scans show no evidence of cast geopolymer, no chemical softening, no anomalous tooling. The technique was masonry, extraordinary masonry, executed at a precision Western archaeology had spent 5 centuries refusing to take seriously. The construction tradition behind Sacsayhuaman did not stay buried with it. That is perhaps the most quietly tragic thing the modern analysis revealed. The polyhedral masonry technique that produced these walls was the culmination of a regional engineering tradition that had been developing in the Andes for over 2,000 years. The pre-Inca cultures of Tiwanaku, working at the southern shore of Lake Titicaca between roughly 500 and 1000 AD, were already cutting precisely fitted andesite blocks at sites like Pumapunku, with joint tolerances and geometric complexity that prefigured what the Inca would later achieve. The Wari Empire, which rose between Tiwanaku and the Inca, refined the technique further. By the time Pachacuti began the construction of Sacsayhuaman in the 15th century, his masons were inheriting more than a millennium of accumulated knowledge. And then it stopped. After the Spanish conquest of 1533, the technique vanished within a single generation. The masons were absorbed into colonial labor systems, reassigned to building cathedrals and Spanish-style hacienda walls using European mortar and rectangular block standards. The workshop knowledge, the apprenticeship lineages, the specialized tooling, the calibration procedures, all of it was transmitted orally and never written down. Within 50 years of the conquest, no one in Peru could reproduce the joints anymore. By 1600, the technique was effectively extinct. By 1700, Spanish chroniclers writing about the walls had begun speculating that the Inca must have known some lost secret, because by then, no living mason could imagine how the work had been done. This is the part that should not be glossed over. Sacsayhuaman is not the trace of a vanished civilization that mysteriously disappeared. It is the trace of a living engineering tradition that was actively destroyed within recorded historical memory by a colonial system that had no interest in preserving it. And here is where the distance of 500 years collapses into something far more immediate. Modern seismic engineering, the discipline of designing buildings that flex and reseat themselves during earthquakes, is rediscovering principles the Inca masons had already mastered. The walls of Cusco are still standing. Luis Valcarcel did not live to see the lidar data prove him right. He had been right about the most important thing. Let's put the lost civilization argument to rest properly, because it deserves more than a dismissive wave. It deserves to be dismantled with the actual evidence of what pre-Columbian Andean engineers were genuinely capable of. And that evidence is frankly stunning. Start with the road network. The Capac Nan, the Inca royal road system, stretched over 40,000 kilometers across some of the most difficult terrain on the planet. Suspension bridges woven from grass fiber spanned canyons that European engineers would not bridge until the 19th century. The Huachuca Bridge across the Apurimac River, rebuilt annually by local communities using the original Inca techniques, has been load-tested to support modern vehicle traffic. Grass rope, 15th century engineering, still working. Then consider terrace agriculture. The Inca transformed the vertical Andes into a productive food system through retaining walls, hydraulic engineering, and microclimate management at sites like Moray, where concentric circular terraces create temperature gradients of up to 15 degrees Celsius between the top and bottom rings, allowing the cultivation of crops from different ecological zones in a single location. This is climate-controlled agriculture, designed and built without written mathematics. Then there is Machu Picchu itself. The drainage systems beneath the citadel handle the 2,000 millimeters of annual rainfall that would otherwise have collapsed the entire site within decades. The foundations rest on engineered fill layers of crushed stone graded by particle size, a technique modern civil engineers call structural drainage layering and consider essential for any major construction in seismic terrain. The Tiwanaku platform of Pumapunku, built 1,000 years before the Inca, contains andesite blocks cut with internal grooves and tenon joints accurate to within fractions of a millimeter, indicating that the precision tradition was already mature in the southern Andes by 500 AD. Replication experiments confirm what the surviving sites already imply. Jean-Pierre Protzen and his teams at Berkeley demonstrated through years of fieldwork that Inca-style polyhedral joints can be produced using only stone hammers, plumb bobs, and trial fitting. Slow, demanding, requiring patience and accumulated craft knowledge, but entirely achievable. There was no miracle of engineering here. There was accumulated knowledge, generational craft transmission, and determined human effort. The same brain, the same cognitive capacity, the same imagination that exists in every person alive today. Sacsayhuaman is often described as an Inca fortress, but that framing, compelling as it is, undersells what these walls actually represent. They are not just defensive architecture, they are a threshold. The point preserved in stone where a regional engineering tradition reached its full maturity just before colonial collision erased it from living practice. The moment when 2,000 years of Andes masonry knowledge crystallized into joints so precise that 500 years of earthquakes have not been able to break them. The lidar scans didn't reveal lost super technologies or vanished founder civilizations. They revealed people. Specific, traceable, fully human Inca engineers working under named emperors, drawing on a craft tradition that stretched back through Wari and Tiwanaku into centuries of accumulated experimentation. The methodology was masonry. Extraordinary masonry, executed by trained crews using stone hammers, plumb lines, and trial fitting, refined across generations until the impossible became standard practice. What still cannot be answered is the full scope of what was lost. The Inca had no written language. The masons who knew how to cut polyhedral joints transmitted that knowledge through apprenticeship, not through manuscripts. When the Spanish conquest reassigned those masons to colonial construction projects within a single generation, the workshop knowledge dissolved with them. The technique survives now only in the walls themselves, as physical evidence of procedures no living person can fully reconstruct. If a tradition this sophisticated could be erased within 50 years of contact, the obvious question is what other engineering knowledge has been lost throughout history that left no equivalent monuments behind? Whatever else the pre-Columbian Andes produced in the way of structural innovation, hydraulic design, or material science, much of it is gone. Sacsayhuaman is not the peak of Andes engineering. It is the surviving fragment of a peak that colonial history happened to leave standing because the stones were simply too large to remove. With most of the Inca Empire's construction sites still incompletely surveyed, Sacsayhuaman is almost certainly not finished rewriting the history of pre-Columbian engineering. Whatever is still buried under 5 centuries of overgrowth, it was put there by people who needed no outside hand to achieve something extraordinary. They looked at a mountain and imagined a wall the earth could not break. Then they built it.